Did I just find the perfect D&D one-shot to run this Halloween? Stay tuned to find out. Hey folks, I'm William, this is Runeforged, welcome to the channel. Today we're talking about Horror at Devil's Run by Jeff C. Stevens. Be sure to stick around to the end of the video where I give my overall thoughts on the adventure. And if you'd like to pick up a copy of this adventure for yourself, you can find links to do so down in the description. So what is the Horror at Devil's Run? Well, it's a Halloween-themed adventure for 5th level characters, but also includes rules for easy scaling for levels 3 to 7. Here's the premise. The small farming village of Devil's Run is about to have its yearly pumpkin festival. Unbeknownst to many, old Pete Barker, a pumpkin farmer of many years, is having difficulty getting his crops to grow. Fixated on winning the festival's largest pumpkin award, old Pete made a deal with a sinister entity, the Feeder of Desires, but the deed cost him and the village dearly. The farmer's body transformed into a vine-like creature with a jack-o'-lantern head, and he now waters his thriving pumpkin fields with the blood of kidnapped villagers, binding them below the earth while the pumpkin vines burrow into their flesh to feed. Will our heroes be able to defeat the pumpkin-headed monstrosity and save the villagers? Or will they too end up as fertilizer for the old farmer's sinister pumpkin patch? There's only one way to find out. If you're enjoying this video so far, consider aiding me in my eternal battle against the dreaded YouTube algorithm by crushing those like and subscribe buttons so you don't miss out on more awesome adventure spotlights like this in the future. All right, let's talk a little bit about what comes with the adventure. Of course, you get the 33-page PDF, which includes all the information that you need to run the game, including 7 new monster stat blocks, as well as some reskinned classics to more closely tie in with the autumn harvest theme of the adventure. Each map comes with several different alternatives, including a gridded and gridless version, as well as a day and night version for one map, as well as a pre- and post-corruption version of another. It also includes a set of full-color tokens for use on a virtual tabletop. And if you plan on playing on either Roll20 or Foundry, there are also versions of the adventure made specifically for those platforms. So what did I like about Horror at Devil's Run? Well, first of all, I absolutely love the setting and tone for this adventure. Clearly, Jeff had a very strong theme in mind when he wrote this, and that comes across in the final product. As a result, this adventure is absolutely perfect to run during the fall for either Halloween or Thanksgiving. Also, the adventure has some really nice looking and evocative art, which I've been showing off throughout the video. It really is gorgeous stuff, and possibly some of the best 5th edition art that I have seen so far. I also really appreciate just how digestible this adventure is. At a trim 30-ish pages with a really solid layout, I found this adventure to be super easy to read and understand. Overall, it's very professionally done. Finally, I was absolutely blown away by the sheer usability of this adventure. I love the variety of maps that were included, especially some of the alternate versions that I touched on earlier, with the pre- and post-root infestation of the town being one of the highlights. Also, I was super excited to see VTT-friendly tokens included with the adventure, which is something that you almost never see. But I think that the biggest time saver of all was just purchasing the Roll20 version of this adventure, because without exaggeration, I was able to read through and set up the essentials for this adventure in under an hour, which is significantly less time than an adventure like this would normally have taken. In fact, the VTT ready version of this adventure was so good that I think it's going to be really hard to go back to less VTT friendly adventures in the future. But what are the things that I didn't like about the adventure as much? Well, firstly, I felt like the pacing of the adventure was a little bit off. The first part of the adventure spends a lot of time and word count on social encounters, which is completely fine. But there's one scene that includes about half a dozen different NPCs, and they all have various different things that they want to say and do. And I just found it a little bit difficult to try and incorporate all of those threads in a way that felt natural to the story, especially given the urgency of the situation in game, and also the limited amount of time that we had to actually play out the session. Then on the other end of the spectrum, the last half of this adventure is basically like 3 or 4 back-to-back fights. And that definitely started to feel a little bit sloggy towards the end of the adventure. I'd much rather have fewer but more challenging and more engaging combat encounters than the other way around. Also, I think there's probably a few too many things going on in the final encounter, at least for my taste. In addition to the final boss itself, there are several other creatures and mechanics that you're going to need to keep track of, and I found it to be just a little bit too much to remember, and I felt like that detracted from my overall ability to run the encounter effectively. Which leads me to my final point, and is probably the thing that I like least about the adventure. And that is that I felt the final boss was a pretty big letdown in terms of combat effectiveness. And I think a big contributor to that was just the fact that I feel like their base stats are a little bit too low. 14 armor class, 95 hit points, and an attack modifier of +6 with only 7 damage on average per hit is simply not enough to stand up against a party of level 5 adventurers, even with all the various different lair actions, legendary actions, and minions that are involved in the fight. In our game last night, the fighter took the final boss down to below half HP in a single turn, and it's very likely that the boss would have gone down before they even got to take a full action if the group had been focusing their fire. And to be perfectly honest with you, I think that's completely unacceptable and really not a lot of fun for me as the GM. Now, I think to be fair to the adventure, there are some caveats that I need to mention. The biggest of those is I think this might be more of an issue with 5th edition overall, as opposed to any specific issue with this encounter. In my experience, on average, the characters are simply too powerful relative to creatures of their relevant CR. Also, the players were making use of the new 5e 2024 player options, which I feel has added a ton of power creep to the player side of the equation. And then also, I think it does need to be acknowledged that I did not run this encounter as optimally as I could have. There were a couple of instances where I forgot to use some key abilities, notably the dodge legendary action, which might have kept the final boss alive for an extra turn or two. And there were also a couple of places where I forgot to apply the monster's damage resistance or immunity, although I don't think this would have had any real impact on the overall outcome of the fight. So I think it is fair to say that despite my kind of overall annoyance with the anticlimactic ending to our game, that I don't think it's really fair to blame the adventure for that experience. That said, if I do end up running this adventure again in the future, I'm definitely going to make a couple of changes. Specifically, I'm going to take a really hard look at some of the various different creatures and mechanics that are involved in the fight to see what I can eliminate to free up some cognitive load. And then I'm going to significantly beef up the final boss so that he's more of an individual threat, or at least be able to survive more than 1 or 2 rounds. In retrospect, I think not letting the boss go down until the players had managed to deal with the magical gemstone that was corrupting him would have been a really good option. And then using the various different monster abilities to root and pull the characters away from the gemstone probably would have made for a much more cinematic finale. Okay, so what are my overall thoughts on Horror at Devil's Run? Well, aside from a few minor pacing issues and the relatively climactic ending to our session, I actually really enjoyed this adventure. I think that the setting, tone, and accessibility really carry this adventure and make it a strong contender for the best one-shot to run for either Halloween or Thanksgiving. And if you want to run a Halloween game this year but haven't done any prep, I highly recommend checking out this adventure, especially if you use Roll20 or Foundry VTT, as you can easily read through and set up this adventure in just an hour or two, and I think it's pretty likely that you and your group will have a pretty good time running it. If you're interested in picking up a copy of Horror at Devil's Run for yourself, you can find links to do so down in the description. In the interest of full disclosure, some of those are affiliate links, which help to support the channel at no additional cost to you. And if you've enjoyed this video, please consider checking out my other 5e adventure reviews, which should be popping up on your screen right about now. Well, I think that about wraps things up. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day. Bye.